You're with me, I'm Nana Akua. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. This is GB News. Remember this?
The Brexit vote was a fair, democratic expression, and I will always respect that.
Not about going back into the EU. We've left, we're not going back. It's not about the single market or customs union.
Really? The busybody EU are at it again, interfering with the sovereignty and democracy of this great country by attempting to tie future UK governments in with their trade policies, otherwise face financial penalties if we deviate. So basically, the EU want to include a termination clause, or what many EU diplomats have referred to as a Farage clause, into their Brexit reset negotiations, tying the hands of a potential Reform UK government if they were to be successful in the next general election, as the polls suggest. And, of course, our weak leader, Sir Keir Starmer, will probably agree to it. Nigel Farage was not happy. He wrote this on X. "No parliament may bind its successor, and we will not honour any clause. If Starmer signs this, it's a democratic outrage." Now, the deal is that if either side wanted out, then that side would have to pay significant financial compensation. According to a draft negotiating text, the clause would apply to a proposed veterinary agreement aimed at slashing Brexit red tape for British food and drink exporters. Oh, this sounds like it's almost fair, but with dynamic alignment, which is likely to be in place by mid-2027, which would mean that the UK would automatically have to follow updates in rules and standards to align with the EU, and the EU wish to strike a long-term agreement extending beyond this Parliament, so beyond 2029, in signing this deal, Sir Keir Starmer would be effectively dictating the policy of the terms of the next government's trade relationship with the EU, a deal that would turn the UK into a rule-taker and a vassal state. So pretty much like when we were in the EU, when we had to pay a fee to exit, but this time with no decision-making power. Well, one EU diplomat called it a safety provision to provide a deterrent for Farage and co. But what place do they have interfering with the democratic will of the British people? If we demand a change of government, a successor should not be bound to the EU. Now, this is the whole reason why many people voted to leave. Sovereignty. Even if you voted to remain, how would this be a good idea? Who would agree to this, I hear you ask? Yes, our great leader, Sir Keir Starmer, who is happy to postulate on the global stage demanding determination for the people of Greenland. But where was that rhetoric for the Chagossians? Agreeing to a deal to relinquish British sovereignty and pay to give away our island, and then pay at great cost to the British taxpayer to rent it back. A shocking deal. Perhaps instead of satisfying, in my view, his ideological mandate, perhaps Keir could focus on the mandate of the British people who democratically voted to leave. How about you focus on that, Keir, maximising the Brexit benefits? It's outrageous.
We're living in a time of what feels like pretty significant social change, and it makes us question things that we've even taken for granted for decades. And one of those at the moment that people are wondering about is actually money. Is the money in your bank account safe? Should you be investing elsewhere? Are we looking at a potential global crash? What will it mean for your savings? Is there a way that you could be using your money that might be outside of government control even? Well, TallyMoney is potentially one solution. So I'm delighted to say that I'm joined today by the CEO and founder of TallyMoney, Cameron Parry. What is TallyMoney?
Well, at TallyMoney, you basically get gold you can spend. So we give people an individual account in their name, everyday account. They get a sort code, an account number. They use that account just like they would pounds from their bank, but it's milligrams of gold that we brand as Tally. OK.
Why would you do that, though? What is the benefit to the customer instead of just having a normal pound sterling account?
Gold's performance against the pound is above 11% per annum over the last 25 years on average. but we still need money in our daily lives. And we have savings. We know that it's good common sense and prudent to save up for things, not just live in credit. You know, whether it's a holiday or a rainy day, your retirement planning. You need to have money in your life, basically, that you can rely on, that's dependable, that nobody meddles with, that nobody can weaponise against you, which is another element of government control when it's the government currency, which we could talk about another time. And it should be pretty simple and straightforward. And that's what we deliver at Tally. And really, we just want people to feel safe and happy with their money. There was a time when the bigger your bank balance, the more confident you felt. Now it's like, I need to do something with it. I can't leave it there. In Tally, you can.
Okay, brilliant. Cameron Parry from TallyMoney, thank you so much.
Thank you, Bev.
Well, I'm joined by the Deputy Leader of Rejoin EU, Richard Morley. Richard, now Nigel Farage said that no government should bind their successor. What are your thoughts on that? Because it does seem a little bit fair. People voted to leave. This, to many, will seem like we are joining the EU on one side of the trade deal, which is fine, but we don't have any control over what we're actually signing up to and for what period of time.
Well, there are a couple of points there. First of all, we must remember that although Britain made a referendum decision by a very narrow margin nearly 10 years ago, for the last 4 or 5 years, there's been a substantial majority in every single poll, taken even by Brexit favouring newspapers. And that poll has favoured rejoining. 58% of the population currently wish to rejoin. That's up from 56% last year. So let's not labour the democracy point of view here. Let's also think about it from a purely contractual point of view. Obviously, Nigel Farage isn't a lawyer. If you're negotiating a contract with a company, for example, then if the CEO changes, that company is still bound by the contract of his earlier predecessor. And it's exactly the same with international treaties. An international treaty is made between nations. If you withdraw from it, then plainly, like any other contract, there has to be compensation for those who suffer what is effectively a breach of contract. Now, what the EU has said is that the costs involved in setting up the various elements of the new agricultural deal, for example, which is what this has been based upon, the elements of setting that up will cost the EU a great deal of funding. If Britain suddenly decides to leave it shortly after it's been set up, then, of course, all that money is wasted and the EU wants that money back. I don't think there's anything unreasonable about that or anything unusual in contractual or indeed international law.
Well, you talked about not labouring the democratic point, but and you're saying that every poll has said that most people want to come back and rejoin the EU. Well, there's been huge polls that say that Keir Starmer's only got 16% of the share of the vote. People want him to leave as leader. I mean, does that mean that everyone's going to take notice of that? And all these polls, to me, in many respects, may not really be true. Some people don't even say what they really think. But the bottom line is, we have had a vote to leave the EU, and many would argue that, OK, when you leave government, there are certain deals that you can't carry on to the next Parliament. Why can't Sir Keir Starmer, if he really wants to sign this deal, sign it until the end of the Parliament? He shouldn't bind the British people into something that they voted to leave. Whether you're saying that these polls say one thing or another, we voted to leave, we're not in the EU, and this, many would see, as a way of rejoining through the back door.
Well, one has to ask oneself, how long does a referendum vote hold validity when it's quite clear that the majority of people in the country wish to reverse it?
Well, until
we can't simply carry on saying in 10 years' time, we can't simply say that sometime in the last epoch we had a vote and that vote still stands. Of course it doesn't.
Well, of course
Times change. People have the right to change their opinions as well. And the British public have changed their opinions. opinion.
Well, that's right. But then you have a vote. If everybody said we want another referendum about rejoining the EU, then there would be a vote. And I would expect either way, whichever way it went, that the political elite would honour that vote, as would the British people. But until that time, we haven't got that. People have voted to leave. And so far, many people are not happy with the trajectory of this government. And then by binding the next government to something that really, and let's be honest, some of the diplomats apparently calling it the Farage clause to stop Nigel Farage, if he does enter Parliament, from changing things. I mean, that's not democratic at all.
It's not about stopping Nigel Farage, it's about holding a nation to its word. In the case of international treaties, this is always the case. You can't simply just say, well, a new government simply just goes back on its word, because then who wants to make a contract with a nation that swings to and fro like a tennis ball? It simply can't be done. Now, they're not saying that we can't do it. They're simply saying that if we do this, then the costs which they incur have to be reimbursed. And that seems to me to be perfectly fair enough.
But you're missing a bit out, because they're saying that they want it to extend to beyond this Parliament. Now, there are at least 4 years where they could do this deal if they really want to. I don't agree with it, but hey, if they're going to do the deal, I don't want Keir Starmer to do it, but he's going to do whatever he wants because he's got a massive majority in Parliament, even though people voted to leave, and this is, many would see as a way of getting in through the back door. But hey-ho. But if he's going to do it, then it shouldn't be that he can do the deal beyond the Parliament, because people in this country have a right to have a different deal and be able to, for that deal to end when his tenure as Prime Minister ends.
I'm sure if he wanted to do, if he could do that, he would do that. But of course, the EU also have a voice in a contract. They are the other side. They have the right to sort of say, well, wait a minute. Our perspective is a bit different from yours. We can anticipate that Britain may well change its direction in 4 years' time, 180 degrees, because that will be the case if Farage comes in to replace Starmer. We've got 180 degrees in the opposite direction. Now, it's fair for the EU to make a condition in this contract that some degree of compensation is paid, as one would do in any commercial contract. It's perfectly standard practice. There's nothing unusual
but whose
about
side
it.
are you on then? Yeah, but then whose side is he on? He should be on the side of the British people.
Oh, Keir Starmer, you're absolutely...
on the side of the British people and on the side of democracy, which is that during his tenure, if he's going to do all that, fine. But note that he's likely to be voted out because people don't want him to be doing what he's doing. As you see with the polls, he's got about 16% share of the vote. Most people want him gone. He's even below the Conservatives as a leader, and nobody's really happy with the things that the Labour Party are doing, hence the 12 already U-turns. So for him to tie the next government in to something is not OK. If he wants to do it during his tenure, I can't argue with that. He's democratically elected. But beyond that, no.
Well, I share your criticisms of Keir Starmer in general. I think he's made an appalling mess of the country. So on this, we are in full agreement. The point is, however, I don't think that he has a complete freedom of manoeuvre in this element, that he wants to increase the ties with the EU for very sound economic reasons, and they are asking for something in return. He has to negotiate that. Remember, this isn't a deal which has been finalised yet. It's not up for the Commons to do. It's simply a discussion that's going on, and I'm certain that there might be toing and froing here and there before the deal is finalised. Let's hope it is, because obviously, from our perspective, we would like to go further than simply just doing this deal. We would like to sort of start negotiations on re-entry, which the majority of British people are behind us in. That's why we are going up in the polls.
If that's the case, then why is Nigel Farage so ahead in the polls? If that's the case, if what you're saying is true, then it doesn't really marry up with the fact that Nigel Farage is sitting on about 34% of the vote share right now. Now, that's something, and that's got to tell you something too. Listen, Richard, I could chat to you all day on this, but I have to leave it there. Really good to talk to you.
I'll give you a quick answer to your question. The answer is immigration. That's why Nigel Farage is leaping in the polls, because people support his policy on immigration.
Well, that's one of the reasons, but they're also obviously supporting his stance on the EU as well. Thank you very much, Richard Morley. Really good to
My
talk to
pleasure.
you. He's the Deputy Leader of Rejoin EU. Now, listen, don't forget, friends of GB News can vote in our poll this afternoon. And we're asking, is the EU interfering in our sovereignty? The results so far, 99% of you say yes, only 1% of you say no. You can also vote in that poll and all the polls by scanning the QR code on the side of the screen, or you can visit gbnews.com/you decide.